So moving on to our 12th Prime Minister, who was William Petty, the second Earl of Shelburne. I'm not quite sure how that's correctly pronounced. One quick word about the Duke of Grafton I forgot to mention. He was a Whig. I forgot to mention his political allegiance, as were many of the Prime Ministers of the time. Also, I should say, just after Lord North, there was a brief period where the Marquess of Rockingham was in office again. So just after the Marquess of Rockingham was the second Earl of Shelburne, who's widely known as simply the Earl of Shelburne. So he was born in 1737 in Dublin, and he's one of a number of Prime Ministers who's of Anglo-Irish heritage. Another famous example is the Duke of Wellington. And some facts about him. This is a quotation. "The sun of Great Britain will set whenever she acknowledges the independence of America. The independence of America would end in the ruin of England." So that obviously indicates he was very loyal to King George III. He did not want to see American independence. And that shows again just how devastating Lord North's failure to handle that crisis was. In the 1760s, Lord Shelburne spent 2 years as William Pitt's Secretary of State, and in the late 1770s he led the Whigs in opposition. He formed a government as Prime Minister on Lord Rockingham's death in 1782, with the 23-year-old Pitt the Younger as his Chancellor. During his short term, he has succeeded in securing peace with America, France and Spain, presided over the beginning of Britain's trade recovery, and put forward a programme of public service reform. An intellectual figure, Lord Shelburne is credited with establishing some early reformist ideas. He was less appreciated in his own time, being considered devious and untrustworthy. He was a Whig as well, in part at the time of the Treaty of Paris, which ended the American Revolutionary War of Independence. That's another side fact. Now, some other things about the Earl of Shelburne. He had been a soldier. After attending Oxford University, he served in the British Army during the 7 Years' War and personally took part in the raid of Rochefort and the Battle of Minden. As a reward for his conduct at the Battle of Gloucester Campden, Shelburne was appointed an aide-de-camp to George III, and he became involved in politics thereafter. He also served as the President of the Board of Trade in the Grenville Ministry. Now, he was in office for a very short time, from the 4th of July 1782 to the 2nd of April 1783. But as is said in the write-up there on the 10 Downing Street website, he actually achieved quite a lot in that time, so I think that needs to be taken into consideration. His biographer John Cannon says his uneasiness prompted him to alternate flattery and hectoring, which most of his colleagues found unpleasant and too suspicious. In debate he was frequently vituperative and sarcastic. Success came too early and produced jealousy, especially when he was tagged as an upstart Irishman. He never understood the power of the House of Commons or how to deal with its leaders. I do wonder if he hadn't been from Ireland, would he maybe have been held in high regard in his day. But certainly if you look at his achievements compared to Grafton in the North, especially given he was in office for a much shorter time, maybe Shelburne deserves more credit. Quite possibly. So he had a number of titles throughout his life. There's something famous called the Lansdowne Portrait. That was one of his titles. And the interesting thing with this actually is that it was given as a gift of appreciation to British Prime Minister, the second Earl of Shelburne. This is actually quite interesting. It was owned by, commissioned in 1796 by Senator William Bingham of Pennsylvania, who was one of the wealthiest men in I'm mixing up my words here. One of the wealthiest men in America at the time, and was given as a gift of appreciation to British Prime Minister the second Earl of Shelburne, who was later the Marquis of Lansdowne. And he is described as an American sympathizer who supported independence of the colonies and Parliament. So he is described certainly in this article as a sympathizer of American independence, and he secured peace with America. And he was also known as a collector of antiquities and works of art. So all in all, I think the Earl of Shelburne was quite an interesting figure. So look up that article on the Lansdowne portrait. It certainly makes interesting reading. So the second Earl of Shelburne, died on the in 1805 at Berkeley Square in London at the age of 68. So I do believe if he had not been born in Dublin, would he have had a bigger reputation at the time? Quite possibly. He was only in office for a very brief period, from July 1782 to April 1783, but in that time he certainly made quite a lot of achievements. So I think that would need to be acknowledged in any assessment of early Prime Ministers.